Let's go ahead and call the board meeting, the budget hearing for August 26, 2024 to order. First item on the agenda, start with the budget.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The budget hearing, number one, is what we're going to start the evening with. There's no action on the budget, but I wanted to briefly introduce it with you. First of all, I want to commend our CSFO, Courtney Brown, for the months it takes to put this together. It's an excellent budget, and as have all the budgets been this year, our revenue sits in a better position. That makes budgeting a little bit easier to contend with, but it's an exceptional budget. And on top of that, we are introducing a different way of viewing the budget through a platform that's known as ClearGov, and you'll get to see pieces of this today, but this is available to our public, both in the budget book format and the transparency portal format, and you can access both of those from the board meeting website and from the city schools page. So I want to just give, if I can, just a quick overview of the budget with you, and then turn it over to Courtney to start getting into some details. In the budget overview, one of the things that I want to point out is just what the general highlights are, and it's got a graphic here I'm just going to put up and show you just general highlights of the budget. It's under overview. Scroll on that. There we go. So 923 total employees are in our budget this year. 525 of those are teachers. It is notable to point out that 115 of the teachers in this pool are locally funded. That's a tremendous contribution from our community. Our student-teacher ratio total is 13 students to 1. Student-teacher ratio in the exceptional education program is 8 students to 1, both really tremendous numbers. You can see some of the additional student-teacher ratios that I think are important to note as well. With education programs, it's notable that we have 24 advanced placement courses, 4 dual enrollment courses, and we have tremendous participation in both of those programs. We offer 5 world languages, 17 career and technical education courses, 34 K-12 arts education teachers throughout the district, 5 arts education programs, 39 athletic teams, 5 elementary STEM teachers, which is a new program, of course, we're adding this year. We have 13 school resource officers. We have 20 counselors, 5 behavioral specialists, and a social worker, plus 19 school nurses. This just gives you a general overview of where we spend most of our money. As Courtney will tell you, about 90% of the dollars we spend in the general fund is for people. And these are examples of where we're investing. So I'm really pleased to show this to you just as an opening to where we're heading. So Courtney will walk through with you the fund summaries, and then I'll make some comments about capital and some closing comments as well. It's a hearing, so certainly any questions you've got along the way, please do ask those. Courtney, thanks. Take it away.
All right, so like I showed you, you can access this information from our website. Go to our district's financial reports and click on the digital budget book View Now banner, and it'll take you right here. I'm excited to introduce our budget using the ClearGov software. It offers a user-friendly platform for viewing, downloading, and printing our budget book. This budget book also has historical information back to FY 2014. And our budget book begins with a story. Our budget story begins with a letter from Dr. Freeman, followed by the history of our school system. It tells about our fund structure, our basis of budgeting, our financial policies, and a glossary of commonly used accounting terms. And Dr. Freeman just mentioned our budget overview. You can look at our mission statement and our system goals, our budget overview letter with the graphics that we just went over. And then we have a section on our priorities and issues, and then significant personnel changes. I want to talk a little about that. The FY 25 budget includes the state mandated 2% raise for all employees. The Board of Education also approved additional raises to teachers based on their highest degree and years of experience. This initiative was a primary goal of the board to place salaries at a top tier level in the state. The budget also includes new teacher positions created to maintain optimal numbers of students in classrooms, additional teachers to maintain optimal caseloads for exceptional education students in classrooms, and additional paraprofessionals to support the exceptional education program. An exciting addition to our academic programs is a science, technology, engineering, and math class in our elementary schools, and students will learn about these content areas through engaging in real-world applications. To support this program, we added one STEM teacher for each elementary school. This complements our arts and music classes already provided for elementary students. And in addition to STEM classes in our elementary schools, we added one additional health science teacher to support this program that continues to grow in popularity among students. Additional new positions included a theater production teacher at the high school, one program specialist for the exceptional education program, and 2 board-certified behavioral therapists, and 1 instructional partner for each school. So here's a graphic of how our total employees budgeted with all funds. We have 439 state-funded employees, 290 locally funded, 123 funded with other state funds, and 51 with federal funds. This is how our salary budget is allocated. You see that we spend 60% of our budget on teachers, 23% on support staff, 5% on other compensation, 4% on principals and assistant principals, 4% on other certified staff, 3% on counselors, and 1% on librarians. And this is a line graph that shows 10 years of our general fund salaries and benefits compared to and the locally funded portion of those salaries and benefits. You see that it's increased proportionally over the years, but the state in FY25, the state passed the 2% raise, and they did provide funding to cover that, and also some additional money in our OCE allocation, other current expense allocation, which helps offset some of the amounts that we would locally fund. Okay. So the FY25 budget is categorized by fund source. This includes the general fund, the special revenue fund, the debt service fund, the capital projects fund, and the expendable trust fund. Under these fund summary tabs, you can find a description and summary of each fund, complete with historical trends of revenues and expenditures. Additionally, for those who would like more information, you can get a detailed analysis. A spreadsheet breakdown is available, and you can get an in-depth view of the budget. So our general fund is the primary operating fund of the board. It is used to account for all fund resources except those required to be accounted for in another fund. The board's general fund primarily receives revenues from the Education Trust Fund, or ETF, appropriated by the Alabama legislature and from local taxes. The State Department of Education allocates amounts appropriated from the ETF through their foundation program to the school board on a formula basis. So for this year, we are projecting $103.6 million of revenue in FY25, which represents an 8.7% increase over the prior year. This is a combination of increases in the state budget and local funds. Budgeted expenditures are projected to increase by 3.7% or $3.63 million to $100 million in FY25. By the end of FY25, we anticipate that the general fund will have a 2-month reserve, which is the goal of the Board of Education. The general fund budget has realized above average state and local revenues increases for the past several years. While this has been a positive trend, there are several factors that must be considered when planning for the future. While local revenues have been high for the last 2 years, we do not expect the trend to continue. The 10-year average growth of local ad valorem taxes for us has been about 4%, with some years seeing very little growth. Expenditures have also been increasing at a rate of about 4% per year. Ad valorem taxes in the Bray development will at some point in the near future begin to positively impact local revenue. The impact of residential development will also be an important factor as it relates to student enrollment. The Alabama legislature passed a law that places a cap on ad valorem tax growth at 7%, which will eliminate the higher revenue years like we have recently experienced. Another factor to consider is employee health insurance costs that are paid by the school system will likely increase next year, which could have a significant impact on the budgeting for personnel costs. And the Alabama legislature may be in the initial stages of considering a new funding formula for education. And this will bear watching to see how it impacts our budget. With these factors in mind, we will budget anticipated revenues conservatively, knowing there's an upward trend of expenditures. And here is a historical chart of actual and budgeted revenues and versus actual and budgeted expenditures. You can click on or hover your mouse over any of these line items and it will show you the actual amounts there. Here is our general fund budget summary. You see that we are anticipating a beginning fund balance or a ending FY24 fund balance of $13.5 million. We have estimated revenues of $103.5 million, estimated expenditures of $100.38 million, and we're gonna end with a budget surplus of $3.2 million and with a fund balance of $16.7 million. We're gonna take a look at our revenues and expenditures in detail. This chart represents the sources of all of our general fund revenues. We receive 55% from local tax revenues and 44% from state allocations, a marginal percentage from other sources, and then 0.2% from grants and miscellaneous revenues. Here is our budget and historical trend from FY 2014 to date of revenues. We'll dig in a little deeper. We can see the spreadsheet breakdown, which shows the actual percentage increases from this year to last year in our revenues. We will go over those real quick. So our local tax revenues our state tax revenues increased 5.1%, and that was an increase in our foundation program allocation to cover the 2% mandated raise and benefits. And then we got an additional amount for the nurses. Our local sources increased 11.4%. This is from estimated property tax and also interest income on our best investments. Our other sources of revenue increased due to anticipated grants and donations. And then other financing sources are just what we've received from the schools for expense reimbursements. Our general fund expenditures are categorized by function or the activities for which they were incurred. We have budgeted expenditures for instructional services in the amount of $60.9 million and $17.8 million for instructional support service. Expenditures that are included in this category are used for teachers and aid salaries and benefits, instructional and testing supplies, technology services, and health services. We fund approximately 115 teachers with $8.6 million of our local tax dollars. We've also budgeted $900,000 for the purchase of Chromebooks from our local tax dollars. Excuse me. Okay. So operations and maintenance, we have budgeted in the amount of $10.9 million. This includes maintenance salaries and benefits, utilities, maintenance and janitorial supplies, building and equipment repairs, maintenance contracts, and school resource officers. We have 13 SROs, 4 of which are provided by the city at a cost to us of about $1 million annually. And this amount is to be paid for with local tax revenue in FY25. Our auxiliary service of $713,000 is for transportation operations. We provide transportation service to our exceptional education students traveling between the high school and freshman campus for classes, field trips, athletics, and an employee shuttle. And then our general and administrative services of $3.7 million include central office salaries and benefits, professional services, insurance premiums, and operating supplies. We have $3.5 million budgeted for debt service, principal, and interest, with the remaining amount paid from the capital projects fund. Our other expenditures in the amount of $714,000 are for our preschool operations. We receive an allocation of $207,000 from the state, and the remaining is funded locally. And our other fund uses are the transfers to and from the schools and the CMP pass-through for salaries and benefits in the amount of $600,000. So you can see by this chart that we spend 78.6% of our budget on instructional services and instructional support services. Here's our historical trend of expenditures by function. We'll dig down and look at the changes from last year's budget to this year's budget. Our instructional services and instructional support services increased. This was due to the teachers and aides raises, the addition of instructional partners and STEM teachers, and then additional units added for our exceptional ed program. The operations and maintenance budget increased due to employee raises, security costs, janitorial supplies, and we purchased a maintenance truck. Our auxiliary services or transportation operations decreased from prior year because in FY24 we purchased a bus, and we don't have that budgeted to be purchased out of the general fund this year. General administrative services increased due to an increase in our property insurance, and also staff employee raises. Our capital outlay expenditures, we do not have any in the general fund this year because last year this was budgeted for our lieutenant governor's grant match, which we have in place this year, and it's already been paid out for this year. So we do not have that budget for FY25. We have our long-term debt expenditures of $3.5 million. That decreased from FY24 because we paid off some leases for Chromebooks and the bus leases that we had this year. And then other expenditures increased due to the CMP pass-through and also transfers to the schools for classroom supply.
Courtney, would you elaborate a little bit on the pass-through? We pass through funds when needed for the child nutrition program, because they are required to keep a 1-month fund balance, just like we are in the general fund. So if their operations aren't earning enough revenue to keep them at a 1-month fund balance, we pass through funds to help them to stay at that amount. So first year we put through this much in a number of years, right?
Yes. And we've had some really high reimbursement rates through the COVID years from the federal program, and those are going away now, so we're having to support them a little more than we have.
Yeah, and I point that out because we're still holding the line on meal prices, 6 years, I think, in county. But the impact is we're having to pass through more dollars to make sure operations can stay intact. We don't want to raise those prices. We're trying to hold the line, but it does come at a cost to do that.
Okay, here's a chart that just shows our expenditures by expense type. This shows that personnel expenditures make up 79% of our general fund budget, followed by purchase services and other fund uses, materials and supplies, and a small amount for capital outlay. And here's our historical trend analysis for expenses by fund. And as I mentioned before, we're gonna end our estimated ending fund balance is $16.7 million. So let me tell you what fund balance is. Fund balance is a financial position measurement that represents the difference between assets and liabilities on a balance sheet. It's the total amount of operating surpluses and deficits that a local government has accumulated since its inception. Fund balance is calculated by subtracting liabilities from assets. The State Department of Education requires us to have a minimum of 1 month of fund balance or reserves, as we say. And for FY '25, 1 month is equal to 8.36 million. And our estimated ending fund balance for FY '25 is 16.7 million, or approximately 2 months of reserves. And this is just the trend analysis of our fund balance through the years.
I'll make a comment about this, Gordon. This has been the goal since we started several years back in 18 to start restoring the reserve. It came down in 18 to 19 because there was so much money pulled out of the reserve to pay for capital projects, the large capital projects we did, so we didn't have to borrow as much money, so it was planned. But it has been a challenge a bit to move that level up. The last couple of years, we've been able to make some ground and get back to what the board's goal has been for several years and 2 months. Pleased with that. So fortunately, we haven't had to sacrifice in the personnel ways. We've been able to continue priorities on personnel to make this happen. Other things we've not been able to address, like facilities, for example, but this is a much better financial position just because of the revenues in the last couple of years of court records. Thanks.
All right, let's move along. We'll look at the special revenue fund. Special revenue fund is a little different from the general fund because it accounts for proceeds of specific revenue sources that are legally restricted to expenditures for specific purposes. The largest federal revenue that we receive in a typical year are for the exceptional education through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, and the Child Nutrition Program, or CNP. This year, we will receive approximately 1.5 million from IDEA that we use entirely for teachers and paraprofessionals' salaries and benefits. And the remaining almost 11 million of the investment in our exceptional education program is included in the general fund budget and is largely funded through local revenues. The next part of our special revenue budget is auxiliary services. And these expenditures include our child nutrition program and our bus transportation for our extracurricular activities. And CMP, like I said, CMP federal funds vary based on the number of meals served and the current reimbursement rate for those meals. We've had a higher reimbursement rate in the past. The special revenue fund also accounts for public funds at individual schools that include registration and course fees, extended day program, tuition, and ticket sales. And then the fine arts and athletic programs in secondary schools are an example of education programs funded almost exclusively through ticket sales and fundraising events. And I just want to note that fundraising revenue is not included in this special revenue fund. It is in the expendable trust fund that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But you can see the budgets for those activities by going to onerebelathletics.com or going to the VHCA Arts Education link that is attached. Here's the historical trend of our actual and budgeted revenues compared to actual budgeted expenditures since 2014. Here's the budget summary. You see that we estimate our beginning fund balance to be 3.6 million, revenues 11.8 million, and expenditures almost 11.8 million. So these funds, the money is received and it's immediately spent for the uses that it's incurred. Here's a chart of the revenues by source for the special revenue fund. Local sources makes up 44% of these revenues. They are from school fees, athletic admissions, and donations. Other financing sources are 27%. And these are made up of our local revenue allocation that the board sends down to the school. We send 109.25 per ADM or per student down to the schools to help supplement their budget. We also send down the state foundation program allocations for their library, technology, PD and common purchase allocations. And then they also have transfers between student activity funds that are reflected in this other financing sources. The federal revenues of 20% are from the federal IDEA program and child nutrition fund reimbursements. And then other miscellaneous revenues are from miscellaneous fees and legislative appropriations. Here's some historical data, back to 2014.
Those revenue changes, especially revenue, reflect the decrease from COVID dollars.
Some of it does, yeah, we did have
Bars.
some ESSER funds. When you see the higher green, that's where those would be, right here, starting in 2020, really. We didn't get a lot, but that is what that additional is. Okay, and the special revenue expenditures, auxiliary services make up 33.5%. These are our child nutrition program operations, the expenditure for that, and then extracurricular transportation. Our instructional services of 32.7 are our teachers and teachers' aides that are paid with IDEA funds. The other expenditures of 21.5% are our extended day program operations and then transfers to the board as well as to other school activity funds. Our instructional support services are 5% are for our speech pathologist and professional development expenditures. And operations and maintenance of 5% is for building maintenance and repairs and janitorial supplies. And then the general administrative of 1% is the EDP program manager salaries. And then here again is the historical information. And then by type, you see that the special revenue fund spends 43% on materials and supplies, followed by 37.8% of personnel. That's for the IDEA teachers and aides. And here's how the fund balance has trended over the years. Do you may have any questions?
I've got a couple.
Okay.
First of all, thank y'all for putting this together. I know it takes a lot of time. See Councilman Cook out here. With ClearGov, I want to thank you for some of the questions you've had over the last couple of years. It really helped our conversation about what we want this website to look like and how easy we want the information to be available to our community. So we appreciate that. Couple of questions, one kind of overview and a couple specific ones. On the 5 STEM teachers that we have in elementary school, I think it's important just to remind everybody, where did those funds come from? Because a year ago, we didn't have funds to do that. So how do we now have funds to provide that in every elementary school?
Those were donations from community partners.
Yeah, the program pieces of it, I'll speak to,
Yeah.
came through donations from community partners, Chain Foundation, PTOs, legislators, corporate sponsors, allowed us a budget to do a lot of programming pieces, curriculum, furniture, instructional supplies, et cetera. The 5 positions themselves, what you heard a little bit earlier is that we've had a couple of years of good bumps in local revenue from ad valorem. We all know it. If you live in Vestavia, you pay more in property taxes the last couple of years. We understand and know we benefited from it because it's allowed us to get to where we needed to with a reserve. But it gave us some room this year to do 2 things that were priorities. One is to make sure our salary structure was competitive and really in a top tier place in the state. The other was to try to grow the academic programs that we know have been identified as needs. And so we hit the reserve mark and it allowed us room to do these next 2 things. So it's coming from local revenue. And while we don't really have a projection of what next fiscal year will look like yet, the tax abstracts are not out that I'm aware of, but that'll give us a sense of what kind of growth to expect next year. But considering the average is about 4% locally, our expenditures are hitting about 4%, which have included raises for much of the last 10 years. we think we're in a good position operationally to keep those positions, in place.
You mentioned that I think 78.6% of our budget is the general fund budget
Yes,
is
general fund.
instructional services and instructional support services.
Yes.
Could you just give us a little bit of an overview of what's covered by those terms, instructional services, and instructional support services?
That is our teachers' salaries and benefits, teachers' aides' salaries and benefits, and any classroom supplies. That's all that's in that category.
Then over the last couple of weeks, I've been made aware of some questions from people within our community about, and you addressed this a little bit, but if you could expand on how our athletics and arts activities and extracurriculars are funded.
Yeah.
Both what comes from the board and then what is raised from outside sources.
Sure. So really nothing comes from the board for these activities. All of those activities are funded by fundraisers or donations, and that the club or the activity or the athletic program goes out and fundraises, or either the students pay fees to be a member of the club or to participate in the athletics, but none of that is funded through any public dollars. It's all accounted for in our expendable trust fund. Hadn't gotten there yet. I just stopped for a minute to do some questions, but I do have some more stuff. But yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. And those links to those budgets are what I refer to in the special revenue fund, the One Rebel, and then go to VHCS Arts, and there's budgets for those activities there. Anything else?
Historically, I think one of the graphs showed that 79% this year being spent on, staff and teachers. What is that an increase, decrease? What was it last year?
It's about the same. It's really around 80% in any given year. And I would say, as the pool of expenditures gets bigger, that might shrink a little bit depending on what we're spending the rest of our budget on. So, but it's very average compared to any other year.
And then along the lines of what Scott was saying about the STEM program, when we did the One Rebel capital campaign, that was part of it. And I think us as a board came together and said, look, these plans are really good. We're just gonna have to find a different way of getting there and being patient on and prioritizing which ones we can do and which ones we can't do, with the goal of trying to do them all, but it's just gonna take a lot longer now. So with the STEM, that was one of our initiatives, but now we're able to do it. And so check that box, and now move on to some other boxes that are still on the drawing board, but we intend to, go full speed ahead and hopefully accomplish those goals as well. And I just, in saying that, commend to Todd and everyone else for getting the STEM operational, because that was a huge priority, and it's going to be very beneficial for our students in our community.
Yeah. We're really appreciative of the members that have contributed to that program too. Just a few more things. Going down the fund summary, we have the debt service fund. This fund is used to account for the accumulation of resources for the payment of our board's general long-term debt, principal, and interest. The fund balance that is accumulated in this fund is due to the board's portion of the 2009D Qualified School Construction Bonds, or QSCB. The amount needed to fully refund these bonds is $4.4 million, and we make an annual sinking fund payment to the State Department of Education using our capital projects fund capital purchase allocation. And that's what you see reflected in this fund. We have a fund balance of about $3.4 million. We'll make another payment in it for FY24. So it'll just build till we get to the $4.4 million and we retire those bonds. Capital Projects Fund, so this fund is used to account for financial resources to be used for the acquisition or construction of major capital facilities. Each year, the state allocates approximately $2.4 million to us for facility improvement needs. And this is an amount based on our enrollment. And in addition, this summer, we received an advancement in technology supplemental funds of over $7 million that we can use for capital and operational expenses in FY25. And we will also use the remaining funds of $450,000 from a previous state bond issue for security improvements. And finally, the city of Vestavia will fund $750,000 for improvements to facilities at the school system that the school system shares with the city parks and recreation program. And with this agreement, the city is going to provide us $3.5 million over a period of 3 years to make improvements to facilities that are the property of the school system, but used by the Parks and Recreation Program or shared spaces. And I want to note, when we look at this fund summary, that the A&T funds are not showing as revenue in FY25 because we actually received them in FY24. They're just held in reserves, and we're going to spend them in FY25. And also, it's important to note that the allocations of that size are not expected to continue every year. This was just a certain amount of funds that were available, and once they're gone, we're not going to continue to get them. So here's the summary of our capital fund budget. You see the $7 million, that's the A&T funds that I just spoke of. We get revenues from the state of $2.4 million, and then we're projected to spend $7.8 million on capital outlay that Dr. Freeman will talk about when he goes over the capital plan in just a few minutes. And then we're also going to pay some debt service out of it for $1.6 million. And then our expendable trust fund, which is what we just were talking about with the student activity funds. So this is where all the fundraising and expenditures lie related to those programs. It's made up of non-public revenue that is received through fundraising efforts to support educational programs, academic competition teams, clubs, fine arts, and athletics. Additional non-public revenue is funded through student participation fees and private donations. These estimated revenues represent contributions that add value to the experience our students receive in academic, arts, and athletic extracurricular programming. And you can view the budgets at One Rebel Athletics and BHCS Arts and Education. See that the revenue comes in and it goes right back out to those programs. Okay, so I put some information on our revenue sources here. This is a trend analysis of all of our revenues over all of our funds. So you see that our general fund holds the largest amount of revenue at 86%, followed by the special revenue fund at 9.8%. And then here's the historical activity. You see that 54% is from local sources and 40% is from state sources. Now, this is all funds total, not just the general fund. But I wanted to show this. This is a really neat thing if you really want to dig in. You can go to the spreadsheet breakdown and you see every single revenue that we receive by fund and the amount. So I think that's very informative. The next thing, I put some information here on the State Department of Education Foundation Program. We are allocated $48 million for FY25, and this is our allocation from the ETF based on our reported daily membership based on last year's 20-day count. So last year's 20-day count is what we're getting funded on as of October 1 right now. And this is the trend analysis of our state revenues. You can see When we've had additional revenues over the budget, it was from that advancement in technology allocation. And it started out in FY18, 382,000. FY19, it was 1.9, 20, 1.7. So it's been around 1.9 for the past several years. It doubled in FY23, 3.3, doubled again, FY24, 7 million, but we're not expected to keep getting that allocation. And then just here's some information on what the foundation allocation funds. It funds salaries for our state units, state funded units and fringe benefits. It funds other current expenses, which is what we use to pay support staff and student classroom materials. Sorry. Our teachers are going to receive $1,000 for classroom supply money. And that's up $100 from last year. So last year they got $900. This year, the state included a $100 allocation for common purchases that they can use to pull for other things like copy paper and things like that. Our textbook allocation increased from $75 to $100 per ADM or per student. And then our local match. So in order to receive the 10 mil, to receive our foundation program funding, we have to put up a 10 mil property tax match. So that increased this year by $566,000. And then we also receive other specific allocations for school nurses, tech coordinator, our operation of the school buses, and at-risk and career tech program. Okay, the last thing I have for you is a chart of our annual debt service obligations. You see how it's trended since 2016. It decreased this year because of some lease payoffs that we had in FY24. And then there's the debt schedule here. You can see exactly the payment amounts that we have on all of our obligations. So now I'll take any more questions if anyone has any.
Send the capital plan, if you don't, talk about that for a few minutes. Let's do one of your first. Just generally speaking, board members, when you are developing capital planning, there are three primary drivers to a plan. The first one is student enrollment, because that literally means how many classrooms or space you need to handle student enrollment. I would tell you that past boards, about a decade ago, began a process to address growing enrollment, and that happened over a series of 6 or 7 years. We are in good shape in terms of student enrollment. We're probably less than 80% capacity across the district, so that's good. The second driver is the conditions of facilities, and that's where we are focusing most of our dollars, really almost all of our dollars right now that we have to spend. And the third is educational programs. What are things you want to grow that are programming within your district? So with that in mind, the capital improvements plan is at about $2.439 million. I do want to reemphasize what Courtney said. Those two sources are state dollars, which comes from an annual allocation called the Public School Fund of about $2.4 million, plus the $7 million that comes from a supplemental appropriation called the Advancement Technology. So the majority of those dollars are state funds. This is not something we're pulling from general fund. I want to make sure everybody understands that while our revenues have gone up, we are handling the operation of our school system with those dollars. It doesn't give us a lot of room to do anything with capital. The remaining amount of dollars that's given to us here is budgeted from the city government and the council approving a 3-year contribution to the school system to help improve facility shared spaces. So for example, the turf at the high school this year was funded through that allocation. We plan to do some replacement of gym floors in elementary and middle school next year. There's another turf project probably at Pizzette, a baseball concession and bathroom project that are all funded as part of that over these next few years. So that is in general where the money is coming from. So we're fortunate this year to have a large supplemental appropriation from the state. And what you see in the one-year plan, let's scroll on down, Courtney, as you can see, the first chart across it shows kind of how things are divided up, but I'll just walk through it quickly with you what each request is. Let's scroll on down to the next setup. Yeah, so we've got a couple of buses that we're going to purchase this year. That'll come at a cost of about $150 per bus. We want to make sure we got the best buses for our students, so they're air conditioned, 72 passenger buses. So about $150,000 per bus, $300,000 to replace two. Security service request, we're going to do about $900,000 in improvement on security priority items in our district this school year. We are replacing some, we're beginning to do a schedule of replacement of classroom furniture. You see a little bit of dollars in there for that. Network infrastructure is at about $550,000. And then most of the projects are building services. We're going to do about $4 million of energy improvements, which are mostly controls, thermostats, if you want to simplify it, that we're going to have across the district to give us better control of our systems. I do want to say that we want our rooms to be cool and warm when our kids are there, but when they're not there, we don't want to be expending energy, so this will help us. There's some water efficiency improvements, et cetera, that will be included in that. We're beginning to work on a schedule for replacement of flooring and painting. You'll see that reflected in the plan. Some limited HVAC replacements. There's a bleacher replacement at the freshman campus we need to do, and theater rigging at the high school. I'll stop here for a moment on the theater rigging just to point out some things. Courtney talked to you about how arts and athletics generally are funding themselves. We do a little small bit operationally for each program, but they generally get their money through ticket sales and fundraising and student fees. What the board contributes, though, is, as you heard me say earlier, there are 34 arts education teachers in the district. We pay for all supplements that are coaches supplements, athletic, academic, arts supplements. That's probably about 2% of our budget, maybe just a little less overall. So there's a contribution made by the board, but the other way that we support it is through capital improvements. And this is one of the priority areas that Faith has identified that we need to take care of is the rigging system needs to be replaced at the high school. So that's in the capital plan. We have some other things, canopy replacements at a couple of schools we need to do. We need to do renovation at East. We are realizing a little bump in population at East, and we need some space, and we've got an old cafeteria there that we can put some classrooms in. We'll be doing that next summer, as well as some limited parking and drive improvements. The multi-year plan, Courtney can show you just a glimpse of that. I want to point out to you that the multi-year plan is a 5-year plan. You can see all of the requests that are inside it. I want to point out to you that most of this, in terms of the major budgeted items, we don't have money for it. And a lot of it comes from the One Rebel, One Future plan where we wanted to expand spaces. Some of it's not in there, but a good portion of it is that our needs of the district, both in terms of improving conditions of facilities and educational programs. And you can read about each of those, but I want to just say they're in the plan, but we don't have the dollars for them. There are a couple of new additions in there. One of which, really a couple of them are derived from the enrollment demographic study we did earlier this past year. And I would say over the next several years, we'll have to be thoughtful about growing enrollment at Cava Heights, which likely may result in a need for some additional classrooms. Liberty Park obviously is going to grow to some degree. There's going to be some need for space on that campus before we ever take on a new school. So that's included in the plan as well. So those are just updates from One Rebel, One Future. But we still see these as needs. We just don't have a fund source for them, and we'll be trying to figure that out, as Jay says, over the next few years. So that's the capital plan side of the budget. All right. Questions?
Yeah, Dr. Crimmins, one thing I want to emphasize, you mentioned shared spaces.
Yep.
I think that's fairly self-explanatory, but
Yep.
when you say shared spaces, what you're referring to are gyms and fields that the school system utilizes, but also that our community utilizes through the Parks and Recs efforts. So you may have a baseball rec team out on the baseball field, one day than our team out there, because both groups are utilizing it. The city is offered to help contribute to the refurbishment of some of those spaces.
Well, let me say this about the partnership the board has with the city, and because I'm most appreciative, sometimes this may get past someone who's not watching budgeting very well, but consider this, that the city council appropriates dollars for 4 school resource officers. That's part of our 13. In addition to that, they have taken steps to do this portion of work, to take this off of the board's responsibility for facilities. So places park and recreation use, which are gyms and fields, it's appropriate to me, and they agreed that there'd be a way to help offset some of these facility need costs, and that's where the 3.5 million comes from. So there's a lot of support that already occurs from the city, and I'm mindful that y'all have budget priorities as well. I think you just put your budget out as well. So we're a part of that equation in a lot of ways. So we try to find the ways that benefit both. Safety is one of those, facilities is another. So that's important to point out. Appreciate you saying that.
So Councilor Cook, please make sure that the rest of the city council know how appreciative we are of that partnership.
Okay.
One other thing you mentioned in passing, you mentioned Faith has provided some information. Can you just remind everybody who Faith is and kind of the unique role that she has at our school that most schools don't have, and that level of commitment to the arts?
A uniqueness, I think, in our school system is a commitment to arts and athletics to support the academic picture in our system. And so certainly for many years, our district has had an art athletics director. For a long time, Coach Anderson did it, Coach Seegers did, and now Coach Miles. And we made a commitment a couple of years ago to put the same level position in place for fine arts. And Faith Linhart, who was a high school dance teacher for many years, takes on that role. And so they're both advocates for their program. It's very beneficial. It's unique because you won't find a lot of systems that do it, but we think both are equally important. And when you look at the participation of students in these programs, it is enormous how many kids are participating in arts and athletics. So while we do limited things in terms of what we're able to provide, they sustain themselves in so many ways. I want to make sure the advocacy is the same for both programs. That's what Faith does. Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Courtney, excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney.
All right, so the way the process works is there is a second required budget hearing coming up in a couple of weeks that will be advertised, and at that point, we will bring the recommendation to you for vote. In the meantime, you can provide feedback to Courtney, to me, to any board member about the process. But very, very good job. Thank you. Yeah.
The next item on our agenda is the approval of agendas. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes for the July 31st, 2024 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Back to you, Courtney. Financial statement.
Right. Board members, I have provided the July 31, 2024 financial statements and check register for your review. As of July 31, we have collected 109.4% of our budgeted ad valorem tax revenues compared to the 102.9% we received last year at this date. In July, we earned $128,450 in interest income on our investment treasury suite. To date, we have earned $1,118,000 from that investment. And our total expenditures and transfers out in the general fund as of July 31 were 87.4% of the budget compared to 87.6% last year. In the 10th month of our fiscal year, with all things being equal, we should be at 83.3% of our budgeted expenditures. We were a little above that due to some annual expenditures and the Chromebook and bus lease payoff. Monthly financial statements and check registers are available on our website upon board approval, and all bank accounts have been reconciled as of July 31, 2024.
And I do want to point out that if you look at the percentage of instructional support and instructional services, we're hitting the mark there, which is the major part of the budget. So that's good budgeting. Thank
And also, our check register and historical data can be found on our transparency page that's on our website, where I click to go to the budget. You can click to go there, and you can see historical trends back to FY 2014 as well.
Thank you. Board members, I recommend approval of the financial statement for July 2024.
You've heard the superintendent's recommendation to approve the financial statement for July 2024. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Right. Recommend approval of consent items related to disposal of board property, field trips, in-state and out-of-state overnight.
You've heard the superintendent's recommendation to approve the consent items set forth in our agenda. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Again.
All in favor?
Aye.
Under business, item A, I recommend the board approve the change order for Vestavia Hills High School turf project.
You've heard the superintendent's recommendation to approve the change order for the Vestavia Hills High School turf project. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Board members, this is largely from some work we had to do with underground drainage as we uncovered the original turf. So we can make some significant changes to the project. But all in all, it came in pretty close to budget. Just a reminder that this is paid for by the goodness from the city council to provide shared spaces dollars. So the change order, all of that's a part of the budget now for that project.
All in favor?
Item B, recommend the board approve emergency repair of the structural damage to the cafeteria exterior wall at the Zitz Middle School.
You've heard the superintendent's recommendation for emergency repair of the damage to the cafeteria at Zitz. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Board members, you're aware of a vehicle that moved unfortunately too far into the wall at the Zitz cafeteria, and it was the dry storage area of the cafeteria. Nobody was in there. It was after hours. No one was injured. The driver was not injured, but it was a significant bit of damage. We've had to do some relocation of dry goods, but we're going to already beginning the process with your approval tonight to get this repaired and make it safe.
I will say that our custodial and maintenance folks were out there quickly, and by the next morning had things in really good shape for the school day to go forward, despite some comments that were made to me that some students were hoping the school day would be canceled. There was no need to do that. So,
Not only that, they wanted it closed district-wide.
Right.
So all the schools.
um,
You don't deserve anything you don't ask for, so you might as well try.
All in favor of that recommendation?
Item C, I recommend the board approve a facility agreement with ATI.
You've heard the superintendent's recommendation to approve the facility agreement with ATI. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Board members, a couple of years ago, this board approved a service agreement with ATI, and that is really to provide athletic training for our student athletes. It's a great partnership we have with ATI. We renew that each year, but this year they want to invest in the facility, the training area where they do the work with our students. So this is an agreement to allow them to do that, to make some improvements. So that would be good for us that AT is providing for us.
All in favor?
Aye.
Item D, I recommend the board approve the trademark agreement with Logo Sports Group.
You've heard the superintendent's recommendation to approve the trademark agreement for Logo Sportswear. Do I hear a motion?
Second.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
This is just part of our continued work with vendors to make sure our trademarks are being protected, and we take point on that. And these are two, this one and the next one are just two additions.
All in favor?
Item D, I recommend the board approve the trademark agreement with Moran's Rocky Ridge Hardware.
You've heard the superintendent's recommendation to approve the trademark agreement with Moran's Rocky Ridge Hardware. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Item F, recommend the board approve the textbook adoption committee.
You've heard the superintendent's recommendation to approve the textbook adoption committee. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Board members, there's a statutory requirement that when you are considering adoptions of textbooks, that a committee be formed which consists of stakeholders, parents, and school personnel, and that's what this committee reflects. This occurs almost annually, and it will be different types of textbooks. In this case, it's social studies, but on a rotation, it could be science one year, English, math, career tech, health, etc. So this happens to be one for social studies, and the idea is this committee develops a recommendation that they will bring to me, that I will bring to you in the form of an approval.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Item 8, I recommend the board approve personnel items as submitted.
You've heard the superintendent's recommendation to approve the personnel items as submitted. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Now is the time for public comment. So the individual desiring to speak shall stand and give his or her name and their address. The presentation should be as brief as possible. In no event shall such address exceed 3 minutes. The speaker may make statements about their particular concern with school operations and programs. In public session, however, the board will not hear personal complaints against particular school personnel or against any person connected with the school system. Other means are provided whereby the board may consider and dispose of legitimate complaints involving individuals and employees within the school system. Further, the board does not typically respond to comments during public participation. Is there anybody wishing to make a public comment today? With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Adjourned.